3 men, 1 night, 0 witnesses. On June 11, 1962, Frank Morris and 2 brothers named Anglin walked out of the most secure federal prison in American history and were never seen again. The FBI investigated for years. They found a paddle, a homemade life vest, and absolutely nothing else. No bodies, no fingerprints, no proof they died, and no proof they survived. This is the story of how 3 ordinary criminals pulled off what every prison expert said was physically impossible, and why, over 60 years later, no one can agree on what actually happened to them. Before we get to the escape, you need to understand why Alcatraz even existed. In 1775, a Spanish explorer named Juan Manuel de Ayala sailed into San Francisco Bay and named a small rocky island La Isla de los Alcatraces, the Island of the Pelicans. For years, it was just a bird colony, nothing more. Then the U.S. military took notice. They built a fortress on the island in the mid-1800s and used it as a military prison. The isolation was the point. No walls in the world are more effective than miles of freezing open ocean. But it wasn't until 1934 that Alcatraz became the stuff of legend. That year, the federal government converted the island into a maximum security penitentiary, purpose-built for one specific type of criminal, the ones that other prisons couldn't handle. We're talking about escape artists, gang leaders, the most dangerous, most disruptive inmates in the entire federal system. If you ended up on Alcatraz, it was because you had already proven you were a problem somewhere else. Here's what made the Rock, that's what prisoners called it, so different from every other prison in America. First, sheer numbers. Alcatraz never held more than around 300 inmates at a time. That's tiny. It meant the warden and guards knew every single face, every personality, every behavior pattern. Second, head counts. Guards conducted prisoner counts at least 12 times every single day. They counted at night in the dark, walking those narrow corridors with flashlights, checking that every body in every bed was real and breathing. Third, the water. The bay surrounding Alcatraz is one of the most brutal stretches of open water on the West Coast. Water temperatures regularly drop to around 50 to 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Strong, unpredictable currents run at up to 7.5 miles per hour. And the channel between the island and the mainland? It's 1.25 miles of hostile, churning water. Prison officials were so confident in the island's natural defenses that the warden once told a reporter, "No one can escape from Alcatraz." He was almost right. Between 1934 and 1963, there were 14 documented escape attempts involving 36 inmates. Most ended the same way: recaptured, injured, or drowned. But a few of those attempts are worth pausing on, because they set the stage for what Frank Morris and the Anglins would eventually do. In 1945, a prisoner named John Giles spent years quietly stealing U.S. Army uniform pieces from the laundry facility on the island, piece by piece over years. When he finally had a complete uniform, he slipped onto an Army transport boat and made it all the way across the bay. There was just one problem. He got off at the wrong stop. He disembarked on Angel Island, still within the bay, and was immediately surrounded by Army personnel who recognized he didn't belong. Then there was Clarence Carnes, nicknamed the Choctaw Kid, who participated in an attempted breakout in 1946. That escape attempt escalated into a 2-day battle between inmates and guards, and 2 correctional officers were killed. 3 of the inmates involved were executed. And in 1962, just months before Morris and the Anglins made their move, a man named John Paul Scott actually made it into the water. He swam across the bay using makeshift water wings made from inflated surgical gloves, and incredibly, he reached the mainland shore near the Golden Gate Bridge. He was found by teenagers collapsed, suffering from hypothermia. He was in no condition to run. He was arrested on the spot and returned to Alcatraz. Every single one of these attempts taught prison officials something. They kept tightening security, adding countermeasures, fixing vulnerabilities. And while they were busy doing that, Frank Morris was studying every single one of those failures. Frank Lee Morris had an IQ that prison psychologists estimated around 133. That placed him in roughly the top 2% of the general population for intelligence. He had been in and out of correctional facilities since the age of 13, orphaned young, bounced through foster care, arrested for narcotics possession as a teenager. By the time he ended up on Alcatraz, he had already escaped from multiple other prisons. That's specifically why he was on the island. He wasn't there because of the severity of his crime. He was there because he kept getting out of places he wasn't supposed to get out of. On Alcatraz, he was assigned to Cell Block B, Cell 138, and almost immediately, he started looking for a way out. What he found was this: the cells in B Block had a design flaw. The concrete around the utility corridor vents, the ventilation shafts built into the back walls of the cells, had been degrading for years. The concrete was old. It had been exposed to salt air and moisture from the bay, and it was crumbling. A spoon could dig through it, given enough time. Morris recruited 3 allies, brothers John and Clarence Anglin, who were in cells nearby, and a man named Allen West, who was in the cell directly below Morris. The Anglin brothers were bank robbers from a large Georgia farm family. They were close, fiercely loyal to each other, and they had also made previous escape attempts from other prisons. They were exactly the kind of partners Morris needed. Together, the 4 men began what became one of the most meticulous jailbreak operations in American criminal history. Every night after lights out, they took turns digging. They used sharpened spoons, nail clippers, and a makeshift drill they constructed from a vacuum cleaner motor stolen from the maintenance shop. They drilled slowly, carefully, because the sound of metal on concrete echoes through a cell block, and a guard walking the floor could hear it. To mask the sound, one of the men played the accordion, loud enough to cover the noise of drilling, casual enough to not raise suspicion. The warden had even encouraged a prison music program, ironically giving the men cover to work. They hid the progress of their digging with cardboard panels they painted to look like the original vent cover. During the day, the cells looked completely normal, but the tunneling was just the beginning. To escape, they needed to travel through the utility corridor behind their cells, climb to the top of the cell block, break through a ventilator shaft on the roof, shimmy across the roof, climb down the outer wall, and then cross 1.25 miles of frigid bay water. For the water crossing, Morris designed a raft, constructed entirely from raincoats, over 50 of them, collected slowly from other inmates, trading cigarettes and favors over months. He used a homemade heat source to seal the seams, creating a vessel he believed could hold the weight of 4 men. They also fashioned paddles, life preservers, everything they needed, built entirely by hand inside their cells. And then there was the final detail, perhaps the most brilliant part of the entire plan. The guards conducted head counts 12 times a day, including at night with flashlights shining directly into cells. So the men built decoys, using papier-mâché made from toilet paper, soap, and real human hair collected from the prison barbershop. They constructed lifelike heads, painted them with flesh-colored tones, placed them at the end of their mattresses, under their blankets, in the position of a sleeping man, a flashlight at night through metal bars. At a quick glance, you'd see a head, you'd see a body, you'd keep walking. These men thought of everything. On the night of June 11th, 1962, just after the 9:30 p.m. head count, Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin slipped through their cell walls and into the utility corridor. Allen West, the 4th man, had a problem. He had been slower in completing his exit tunnel, and the cardboard patch he had resealed it with had hardened. He couldn't break through in time. By the time West got through his vent, the other 3 were already gone. Morris and the Anglin brothers climbed 30 feet to the top of the cell block, broke through the roof ventilator shaft, and emerged onto the roof of Alcatraz in the dark. They made their way down the outer wall, using a network of pipes and improvised equipment, slipped into the water somewhere along the north end of the island, and launched their raincoat raft into San Francisco Bay. That is the last confirmed thing we know about Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. After that, nothing. When guards discovered the escape the following morning, the dummy heads still in place, it triggered one of the largest manhunts in San Francisco history. The FBI took over the investigation almost immediately. They searched the bay, the mainland shoreline, every transportation hub in the region. They found a wooden paddle, a makeshift life vest, and a plastic bag containing personal items belonging to the Anglins, photographs and addresses, washed up on the northern shore of Angel Island. They found no bodies, no proof of death, no proof of survival. The official FBI conclusion, reached in 1979 when they officially closed the case and handed it to the U.S. Marshals, was that Morris and the Anglins most likely drowned in the bay and their bodies were swept out to sea through the Golden Gate. But here's where it gets interesting. The U.S. Marshals Service, which still technically has an open warrant for the three men, has received periodic leads over the decades, and some of them are hard to dismiss entirely. In 2013, a letter arrived addressed to the San Francisco Police Department. The writer claimed to be John Anglin, still alive at the time of writing, in poor health, willing to turn himself in if he could receive medical care. The letter has never been definitively authenticated or disproven. A documentary investigation in 2015 used modern forensic analysis on a photograph taken in Brazil in 1975, supposedly showing two men resembling the Anglin brothers living under assumed names. The FBI reviewed the photo. Their conclusion? Inconclusive. And a woman claiming to be a relative of the Anglins told investigators that the family had received Christmas cards from John and Clarence for years after the escape, stopping only in the 1980s. None of this is proof, but none of it is nothing either. In 2014, a team of scientists and engineers rebuilt the hydrological conditions of the bay on the night of June 11, 1962, using tide tables, current records, and oceanographic data from that specific date. Their simulation found something remarkable. If the men launched their raft at or before midnight, which the timeline suggests they did, the currents that night were actually running northward toward Marin County in the mainland, not out to sea. Their conclusion? Based purely on the water conditions, it was physically possible, not guaranteed but possible, that three reasonably fit men on a homemade raft could have made the crossing. The simulation does not prove they survived, but it does systematically challenge the assumption that they couldn't have. And when you pair the oceanographic evidence with the engineering intelligence of what Morris built in those cells, it's genuinely difficult to rule anything out. In the end, Alcatraz wasn't defeated by escape artists. It was defeated by math. By 1963, it cost nearly 3 times as much per inmate to operate Alcatraz as it did to run a typical federal prison. The buildings were deteriorating. The salt air was destroying infrastructure. Repairs alone would have cost tens of millions of dollars. On March 21, 1963, less than a year after the Morris Anglin escape, Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary officially closed. The remaining 27 prisoners were quietly transferred to other facilities overnight. Today, Alcatraz Island draws over 1.4 million visitors per year. You can walk the corridors. You can see cell 138 where Morris lived. You can peer through the vent he crawled out of. And on the wall of the main cell house behind thick plexiglass, you can still see one of the original papier-mâché heads, staring blankly at the ceiling, waiting for a guard who will never come back. So, did they make it? 60 years of investigation, dozens of forensic analyses, a Dutch oceanographic simulation, mysterious letters, and family testimony. And we still don't have a definitive answer. I want to know what you think. Drop your theory in the comments right now. Did Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers drown in San Francisco Bay, or did they disappear into a new life somewhere on the other side? I read every single comment. If this video made you think about something you'd never considered before, that's exactly what this channel is for. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We're going deep on more of history's most compelling unsolved mysteries very soon.